Hey everyone, it's Justin, and oh goodness, it's here. Lost Shadow, the very new distress color, just got dropped today, and I'm so excited that our friends over at scrapbook.com sent me the new products to play around with and create a couple samples for you guys. Of course, we've got a brand new Distress Ink and Distress Oxide in the new Lost Shadow, but of course, Tim has more goodies than just that goes along with it. In addition to the ink pads, we've also got the Distress Oxide Spray and the Distress Spray Stain, of course, both in the new Lost Shadow color. These are going to be really fun to add some spray splatter marks to your projects, both giving you a little bit of those different effects as well. We're also going to get the new Distress Paint in the Lost Shadow color. This will be a lot of fun for people who want to use gel presses because it is an acrylic paint, or also for some splattering in addition to that. Then, of course, rounding it out, we've got the Lost Shadow Embossing Glaze. This is going to be a lot of fun to use for your projects to get that great light gray color onto your word die cuts, onto your sentiments, whatever you may want to use them with. But here they are, all of the products, of course, minus the refills for the oxide pad and the distress ink. Now, this is a great light gray color. I think it blends slightly to the warm gray side, and I wanted to show you guys what it looks like when using each of the products. So right now, I am taking that Distress Oxide of the Lost Shadow and blending it onto some white Nina cardstock, just so you guys can see what it looks like up against that white. It looks a little warm, of course, when you compare the two. Now, when you go in and you blend the Distress ink, because of course the Distress ink is a dye ink of sorts, you're going to get a little bit more of a darker impression. It does change the look. It just kind of depends on what you're going for. But of course, those Distress ink colors are going to be a little bit more tedious to blend than those oxides that always blend like butter. But I'm adoring how wonderful of a gray this is. You can definitely tell that it's going to be lighter than the hickory smoke color. And now we're going to go in. I'm going to use the Distress Spray Stain and spray it next to the Distress ink, just so you guys can see what the spray stain is going to look like. So basically the same color, just a little splattered around. And then after this, I'm going to go ahead and try out that Distress Oxide spray next to the oxide ink that I blended up. And of course, it's going to echo those colors from the ink blending, just be a little bit lighter. I love how that oxide spray is going to sit on top of darker colors. So keep that in mind with this being a lighter color. Next, let's move on and test out some of that embossing glaze in the Lost Shadow color. So I am using my Distress Embossing Dauber, and then I'm going to go ahead and just pour some of that Lost Shadow embossing glaze on top of it. Go ahead and take my heat gun to it, and you'll start to see that color begin to set. I adore how wonderfully light gray this color is. There you go. You see it nice and turning, and then of course you got to let it set just for a couple seconds so you don't disturb it, but it's just a really nice color. Here I am comparing it to both the oxide and the distress ink as well. Finally, let's use the distress paint in that Lost Shadow color. We'll go ahead and just kind of brush it around so you can see how that distress paint is going to look on top of white cardstock. Of course, you're going to see a little bit of my hair as well. I apologize for that. But the most important thing is to see how that distress paint is going ahead and working on that white paper. So let's make our first card. I'm taking my Lost Shadow Distress Oxide, and I'm going to go ahead and blend it on the right side of this panel. This is going to be all shades of gray for this part of the card. So we're going to start with my lightest shade being the new Lost Shadow color, of course, in the oxide. And then I'm going to move on to the Hickory Smoke. So I'm going to blend that up right next to the Lost Shadow color so you can see what they look like when compared to each other. I am doing a little bit of back and forth movements just to kind of blend them into each other. I thought that everyone would want to see all of the tones of gray, how they blend up with each other. So of course that means after I'm done with my Hickory Smoke color, we're going to go ahead and go in with some black soot and blend that up as well. So I've got that going. Great colors being blended up. You're going to see all ends of the spectrum from light gray to, of course, the darkest gray being that black soot. And just go a little bit back and forth with the Hickory Smoke and that black soot color just to blend it up really nicely on that background. Now, as I finish up pulling that color and pushing it back and forth to get a nice seamless blend, I am going to go in with my distress sprayer to get a little bit of watermarks for that bleach effect. I'm just unscrewing the nozzle and tapping that portion onto my project, and then I will go ahead and take a microfiber craft towel in a moment and push it down just to pick up that water, making sure I get everything, and pull it up to get those awesome bleach spots. I just love how that works. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is grab some arch dies from the Nested Arches by scrapbook.com, and we're going to go ahead and die cut it from some white blending cardstock. And then I'm going to go in with the holographic mirror paper, and I really like this gold starry pattern that's included, and I'm going to use the arch dies to die cut this as well. Now I will notice in a little bit that this white arch is actually a size too big, but don't worry, I have a way of correcting that works to my benefit in a moment. So I'm going in with some Lost Shadow Distress ink on this panel, and I'm just blending around the arch so it looks nice and blended up with this gray color. I'm just kind of pushing and pulling until that I get a nice fade with the color. I end up blending most of it, and it just looks like a really nice sort of solid Lost Shadow colored arch. Now I'm also going to go in and splatter a little bit of water to get those bleach marks, and I'll go ahead and pick it up with my microfiber towel and then make sure everything is good to go. Of course, you want to make sure that your silicone mat is nice and clean. I've got my splatter box and I'm grabbing my Distress spray stain, and I'm going to go ahead and just spray it about 4 or 5 times on top of the arch. Now, the way that it's going to dry is pretty unique, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I am using my heat tool to go ahead and set that Distress spray stain just to make sure that it's going to be nice and dry when I go to work with it in a minute or so. So after this is all nice and dried, I am going to go ahead and move on to the next portion where I'm taking my background and the Distress Oxide spray in the Lost Shadow color. I thought it'd be fun just to give a little bit more splattery effects on there, of course, in the Lost Shadow. So I'm spraying that on top of it, and then I'm going to let that dry as well by putting that off to the side. Now I am going to reach for a new product, that being the Rub-On Transfers by scrapbook.com. This is the Card Maker's Sentiments, and I'm going to be using the Here For You sentiment, and these are really fun. They kind of work like stickers, but they also remind me of, if you remember those rub-on tattoos when you were a kid, they remind me a lot of that, but you don't need water to use them, of course. It's nice and dry. They give you a little popsicle stick so you can push everything down. And here you'll see I'm going to use a little gold heart above the here, just nice and centered. And then I'm realizing right now that I didn't cut the right size arch, and it's the same size as that gold holographic arch. So I am going in with the next size smaller arch, and I'm going to fix that. And it actually kind of works to my benefit because I can slightly reposition this arch to make sure that my sentiment is going to be nice and centered. So it does give me a little bit of leeway, and actually it works out a little bit better for me because it is a little off-centered. So this is a great tip to make sure that your card is going to be nice and centered just the way that you want it to. And I'm going ahead and I'm securing it down with some low-tack tape, and I'm going to grab my Spellbinders 6-inch platinum die cutting machine in a moment, and we'll go ahead and get this all corrected by die cutting it through. Now I'm going to go back to my arch die cuts. I'm grabbing my gold holographic mirror arch that I'm going to adhere behind the sentiment arch that I used with the rub-on transfer adhesives. So I'm applying just a little bit of glue on the back. I don't want any gluey wet spots. And then I will put that directly on top of my gold holographic arch die cut. One of my favorite things to do with nesting dies is to use them to frame a smaller die cut of the same family. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. And I also like to do it using liquid glue because it gives you a couple more seconds to kind of get everything nice and into place, move it around to get that perfect frame. And of course now I'm going to put some of that Ultra Bond adhesive on the back of my die cut as well, and we will put that directly onto the background portion of the card. Now, I really like using gold with the use of this Lost Shadow Distress color. I feel like because that Lost Shadow lends itself to be a little bit warmer, it gives a nice sort of accent color when used in conjunction together. You're actually going to see a lot of use of yellow in these cards, and maybe that's just me saying that that's what I feel like it goes the best with. So I'm just pushing everything into place, wanting to make sure that my die cut is adhered nicely to my Lost Shadow ombre, and we're going to add some gold glossy dots by Pink and Main, just because these add a really nice little bit of detail to your cards. I love the glossy dots. They work really well with so many projects. They come in silver as well, so depending on what you're in the mood for, the gold and silver, they got you covered. So here we go. We're going to go ahead, now that the background of the card is all set, we're going to grab a card base that we're going to go ahead and just adhere that Here For You panel to, and then our card is going to be all ready to go. So I'm using that liquid adhesive once again, and here is my first Lost Shadow card all ready to go and share for you. I just love that sentiment with the rub-on sentiment on there. It works really nicely. I love all the different shades of gray and that pops of gold. So love this card. So 1 of 3 down, and now it's time to move on to our second card. Now we're going to go ahead and blend up a little bit more of a colorful ombre, starting of course with the Lost Shadow Distress Oxide. I'm blending it onto the right side of my blending cardstock, and then we're going to move on to my next color, which is Scattered Straw. Like I said, you guys are going to see a little bit of yellow kind of in each of these cards, and I think it just blends so well together. So I am blending the Lost Shadow into the Scattered Straw just to get a nice seamless ombre, moving it back and forth the best that I can. Next color we're going to use is some Wild Honey, get it warmer, a little bit darker. So we're going down with that Wild Honey Distress Oxide, and then I'm going to kind of go back and forth, push and pull as I call it, with that Scattered Straw to get that seamless ombre. And finally we're going to go ahead and finish this up with some Barn Door. So I'm going ahead, applying that down with my blending tool, and then I'll go back in with the Wild Honey color and make sure everything is a nice seamless blend. I just love it. It's a really kind of fiery blend, but it softens up towards the top with that Lost Shadow. And then we'll do a little bit of bleach marks with it, and of course pull it up with our microfiber towel just to make sure that everything is nice and dry. And look, you can really see those white spots as the colors get darker, so I just love the way that that's turning out. Now, scrapbook.com does have these fantastic A2 cover dies, and this is the Thanks one. I'm die cutting it actually 3 times total from white cardstock. I'm doing the first one a little bit slower, but I'm going to go back in and show you guys each one. The reason that I'm die cutting 3 of them is because I do want to stack them on top of each other to create a little bit of dimension. So here you see me using my Ultra Bond liquid adhesive, and this is my not my bottom layer, this is probably the middle layer because I'm applying it to the back side, and I'm making sure you get all the little nooks and cranny, but also not doing too much of the glue as well. I'm going to go ahead and stack one of the die cuts directly on top of it, kind of pushing it around to make sure that all the parts are nice and in place. Using this stacking method is a really great way to get dimension onto your projects if you kind of want to avoid using foam tape. And sometimes, as much as I love using foam tape for smaller portions of my card, when it comes to any sort of frame item or things that are going to go around the edges, I do like using the stacking method because I feel like it's a little more foolproof and gives you a very similar, if not an identical effect. So I'm finished this up with my third and final die cut, a real nice thickness going on. This is one of those cards that you kind of got to see in person to really appreciate how thick that Thanks die cut is going to be, but I really love the way that it turned out. So we're going to throw it into my splatter box, and I'm going to go ahead and reach for my Distress Spray Stain in the Lost Shadow color. I'm going to spray it on top of my stacked die cut, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull my heat tool out just to go ahead and let it dry. Sorry, I do have the crazy arms on my tool out, but that just helps me to put it up on my desk. So after everything is all set, we're going to use some Ultra Bond liquid adhesive on the back of our die cut, adhering it to that ombre background that we created. Now I am noticing that I have a little bit of overhang when I push everything into place, and that's okay. I just use my scissors and I trim off that excess. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab an A2 size card base and adhere my card panel directly on top of it. There you go. Card number 2, all ready to go. Nice and simple using our new Lost Shadow Distress Oxide color, along with the new Distress Spray Stain as well. So as you can see, this Lost Shadow color does pair itself very nicely with some of these warmer blends, especially when you pair it with some of these yellow tones as well. So keep that in mind when you're playing with it. Now to move on to our third and final card, I'm not doing any ink blending at all. I'm just grabbing my Distress ink pad and I am streaking it right across some white cardstock. I love this look because one of the things I thought of is gray shiplap, and it gives that effect when I'm going ahead and dragging my ink pad across the panel. Next, I'm grabbing the Sunny Lane pattern cardstock by scrapbook.com. I'm going to be grabbing this yellow sunray pattern in addition to a gray pathstone pattern that's included in the pack as well. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to go ahead and trim them down into a smaller size to use them on an accent on the bottom of my panel. And I will adhere the gray one behind the yellow one just so it's peeking out a little bit, but the yellow is still the focal image. So I am going to go ahead and adhere that strip into place onto my panel. So I've got that all adhered with my Ultra Bond adhesive. I'm going to go back and use some of these rub-on sentiments, the card maker sentiments. I like the Hope You Feel Better one. So I'm going ahead, I'm trimming it out, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it into place. So once I have it all figured out, I use a ruler just to make sure everything looks as even and as level as I possibly can get it. And then I'm going to go ahead and press it down so that it's going to go ahead and kind of stick until I grab the popsicle stick just to push each of those letters into place. Once I go ahead and apply pressure to each of those letters, I'm able to pull off the backing and I've got a perfect sentiment. Now I did go ahead and grab some of the gold and black butterflies to add to this as well, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to trim those out, and then you will see me adhere them. I think that the butterflies just add a really nice classy effect. It gives a little bit of a pop of that metallic gold. I also think the black balances it out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all trimmed up and get them onto the card. Now I figure out that I want to put them kind of in the corners of my gray panel. I use 4 butterflies to start. You're going to see at the very end that I do add a couple embellishments off camera. I will point out when I do that. But I started with 4 of those butterflies, 2 black, 2 gold, and I do go ahead and I use my popsicle stick to press everything down. Actually, I think I misspoke. I do 3 butterflies at first, and then I go in and I add a 4th one in gold afterwards. What I go ahead and do is I pull off the backing to each of those rub-on transfers, and I do have 1 butterfly off the edge, so I just use my scissors really quickly to trim that up. Now I do decide to trim down this panel a little bit because I decide to do a little bit of framing. So I trim it down to about a 3 7/8 by, probably about 5 1/8 of a size. And then what I'm going to do in a second is after I trim off all of my edges, I am going to go ahead and pull out a piece of playful smooth cardstock in this charcoal gray color. I'm going to go ahead and trim this down to about 4 by 5 1/4 so that my layer is going to be framed really nicely on top of that. I know part of it is cutting off the screen, but that's okay. Adhering it down is going to be the most important part to see. I am using some Ultra Bond adhesive because it's liquid and it's going to give me a little bit of time to get my frame right into place. Loving the way that it looked, but of course it's not fully A2 sized yet. So I'm going to go ahead and add some Ultra Bond adhesive to the back of that and adhere it directly to my panel, but I'm going to get a nice white frame from that card base. So I love the way that this is looking, just pushing everything down into place, but this is when I realize I want to add a couple more embellishments. So you can see I added a little heart in the Hope You Feel Better, a row of 5 hearts, and a little gold butterfly. So there you have it, my third and final card that I created using the new Lost Shadow Distress color by Tim Holt for Ranger Ink. A huge thank you, of course, to scrapbook.com once again for sending all of these new goodies my way for me to play with and share with you guys. Now, don't forget, you can head on over to scrapbook.com to purchase all your new Lost Shadow goodies, along with everything else you saw in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see what you make with Lost Shadow. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.